Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're opening up a specific text, William Boericke's Homeopathic Materia Medica, and we're diving deep into its description of one particular preparation, Arsenicum iodatum. That's iodide of arsenic.
That's right. And think of this deep dive as, well, sort of your shortcut through the source.
Okay.
Our mission is basically to guide you right through Boericke's text, pull out the key characteristics, the symptoms, the conditions he associates with Arsenicum iodatum.
So you walk away with a clear sense of its core picture, according to this source.
Exactly, what this specific materia medica presents.
Okay, great. Let's just jump right into what the source tells us then. It seems to start by highlighting a really fundamental characteristic.
It does. It points immediately to discharges.
Discharges. Okay, but what kind of discharges?
Oh, well, not just any. The text specifically calls out discharges that are persistently irritating.
And corrosive.
Irritating and corrosive. So like burning, gnawing away almost.
Yeah.
That's absolutely the sense the source conveys. And it gives us really fascinating detail. It specifies the discharge irritates the membrane from which it flows.
Okay.
And the tissue over which it flows.
Ah, right. So it's not just coming out, it's actively damaging everything it touches on the way.
Precisely. It's quite a vivid description.
Wow, yeah. The level of detail is really striking.
Yeah.
And the text also mentions the nature of the discharge. It says it can be fetid and watery.
Yes, exactly. So you've got this combination of like an unpleasant odor and a thin consistency.
Right.
And then it describes the mucous membrane itself in these situations. Always red, angry, swollen.
Okay.
And it itches and burns. So you see, the source is really painting this picture of intense local irritation.
Driven by these specific kinds of discharges.
And just as a reminder, the substance is iodide of arsenic.
Got it. Iodide of arsenic. So, starting with that core idea, the irritating corrosive discharge, where does the source say this tends to show up? Where does it suggest its use?
Well, the text moves pretty quickly into specific applications. And there's quite a focus on respiratory and nasal conditions.
Okay, like influenza, chronic bronchitis, those are mentioned. That seems to fit with a focus on membranes and discharges.
Absolutely. And there's actually a lot of detail specifically on nasal issues. Hay fever is listed right there.
Hay fever. Okay.
And also what the source calls old nasal catarrhs, sort of chronic nasal inflammation.
Old nasal catarrhs. Right, so what are the specific nasal symptoms described in the text? What should someone look for, according to Boericke?
Okay, well, it lists quite a range. A thin, watery, irritating discharge. And note this word, excoriating, like stripping the skin. Exactly. And this discharge comes from both the front, the anterior nares, and the back, the posterior nerve.
Sense, okay.
Sneezing is mentioned prominently. Just simple sneezing, but also irritation and tingling of the nose, and this constant desire to sneeze.
Right. I see here it also talks about a swollen nose.
Right.
And then interestingly, a changing discharge, later becoming profuse, thick, yellow. It even mentions ulcers. And the membrane itself is described as sore and excoriated. Again, that excoriated.
And all of this, the source notes, is aggravated by sneezing.
Okay, so the sneezing makes the soreness and discharge worse.
Seems so. And what's really fascinating here is how the source then connects these nasal issues to the ears.
Oh, interesting. How so?
It lists catarrh of the middle ear. It notes that the swelling of tissues within the nose can lead to a hypertrophied condition, like an overgrowth of the eustachian tube.
Which connects the nose and ear, right?
Exactly. And this can even contribute to deafness, according to the text.
Wow, okay. And otitis ear inflammation is listed specifically too.
Yeah. Yes, otitis specifically. And again, we see that theme, fetid, corrosive discharge. And it mentions thickening of the tympanum, the eardrum.
Okay. Plus just a general burning, acrid coryza, that burning head cold feeling.
Right. And the respiratory picture continues too. Things like a slight hacking cough, often with dry and stopped up nostrils.
Makes sense.
Pleuritis exudativa inflammation of the lung lining with fluid. A dry cough, but with little difficult expectoration. And even a phonia, loss of voice.
So it seems like the source is showing us how that initial picture of irritation and discharge can really spread, throughout the whole upper respiratory tract and even further.
That's a good way to put it. It paints a picture of a process extending outwards.
But it's not just about the head and chest, is it? The source seems to take this connection much deeper, linking Arsenicum iodatum to more serious chronic illnesses.
Yes, this is where the description gets significantly, well, heavier. The source makes a pretty strong statement here. It says Arsenicum iodatum seems probable to be most closely allied to manifestations of tuberculosis.
Wow. That's a very specific and serious connection. Does it specify when in relation to tuberculosis?
It does. It details the indicators for its use, according to this text, particularly in the early stages of tuberculosis.
Okay, what are those indicators?
The source lists things like profound prostration, extreme exhaustion, a rapid irritable pulse, recurring fever and sweats, emaciation, so significant weight loss, and a tendency towards diarrhea.
That's quite a cluster of serious symptoms.
It is. And it also mentions phthisis, which, in the historical context of this text, heavily points towards pulmonary tuberculosis,
Oh, right.
particularly phthisis with a hoarse, racking cough and profuse expectoration that's described as purulent, meaning pus-like.
Okay. And this state is accompanied by cardiac weakness, emaciation again, and just general debility.
Yes, that theme of chronic debilitating states is really clear here. It also includes chronic pneumonia, and actually in several different forms.
Like what?
Like chronic pneumonia with an abscess in the lung. It suggests its use even when an abscess is just about to form.
Okay.
And also pneumonia that simply fails to clear up properly, just lingers. And bronchopneumonia after grip or flu is specifically noted too.
Right. And that pattern of general weakness, debility, and fever seems to keep cropping up. Hectic fever, debility, and those night sweats are mentioned again, specifically drenching night sweats.
Yes, drenching night sweats. And linking back to the digestive system for a moment, chronic watery diarrhea is listed again, particularly noted in physical subjects, so those with tuberculosis.
Okay. Now, here's a detail from the source that really stands out to me as interesting. It lists emaciation, the wasting with a good appetite.
Ah,
That feels kind of counterintuitive, doesn't it? Compared to how we usually think of wasting illnesses.
it does, you're right. It's a very specific, maybe even paradoxical presentation that the source ties to this remedy picture. Quite distinctive.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly. What does the source say about the cardiac system, the heart and circulation?
Right. The text describes a range of heart issues. It mentions senile heart issues related to aging, myocarditis, inflammation of the heart muscle, and fatty degeneration.
Okay, and chronic aortitis, inflammation of the aorta. The description of the pulse is also quite detailed, isn't it? It paints a clear picture.
It does, it says. Shoddy, rapid, feeble, weak, and irregular.
Shoddy, like small pellets under the skin.
That's often the interpretation, yes. A hard, small feel.
Okay. And arteriosclerosis, hardening of the arteries, and myocardial degeneration are also listed.
Yes, reinforcing that focus on sort of chronic degenerative changes within the circulatory system.
And the source even mentions threatened pyemia. That's blood poisoning, a really serious state.
Very serious. And interestingly, right there in the text, it actually lists comparison remedies for that specific state, Pyrog and methyl blue. Gives you an idea of the gravity.
Yeah, definitely.
Now, let's maybe look at the skin conditions described in the source. This actually links back quite nicely to that initial idea of irritating discharges we started with.
Oh, okay. I can see how that might connect.
Yeah.
The text describes skin that is dry, scaly. And psoriasis.
Correct. And there's also a very specific mention of eczema of the beard,
Eczema of the beard. What are the details there?
described as watery, oozing, itching, and here's a classic materia medica detail, worse from washing.
Worse from washing. That level of specificity is really typical of these texts, isn't it?
It really is. It's all about the precise modalities and sensations. Acne is also detailed.
Okay, what kind of acne?
Hard, shoddy, there's that word again, indurated base, like a hardened lump with a pustule at the very tip.
Hard, shoddy bases, pustule on top. Got it.
And we also see glandular involvement listed. Enlarged scrofulous glands, historically linked to tuberculosis, interestingly, and venereal bubo.
Okay. And notice how emaciation, that theme we saw prominently in the tuberculosis section,
Yes.
it appears multiple times throughout the skin descriptions as well, underscoring it as a really persistent characteristic in the overall picture presented by the source.
That's a great point. It weaves through different sections. And those debilitating night sweats, they're also mentioned again right here in the context of skin issues.
So it shows how these systemic weaknesses, like the night sweats and emaciation, are seen as tying into manifestations on the surface, like the skin problems.
Exactly. It's presented as a whole interconnected picture.
Okay, so we've covered respiratory, chronic illness connections, cardiac, skin. Are there any other sort of notable symptoms or conditions from the source that we haven't quite touched on yet?
Yeah, the source kind of rounds out the description by listing various symptoms more or less by body system.
Right.
For the head, for instance, it notes vertigo, dizziness, often with a tremulous feeling, a shakiness, especially it says in aged individuals.
Okay, and for the throat?
Throat symptoms include burning in the pharynx, swollen tonsils, a thick membrane described as extending from the fosses, the back of the throat, all the way to the lips.
Wow, a membrane to the lips.
Yes, and fetid breath. Diphtheria is listed by name, as is chronic follicular pharyngitis.
Okay, what about the stomach?
In the stomach section, the source describes pain and pyrosis, that's heartburn, vomiting, specifically about an hour after food.
An hour after food, very precise.
Yes, distressing nausea, pain in the epigastrium, the upper central abdomen, and intense thirst. But here's another specific detail.
What's that?
Water is immediately ejected, vomited right back up.
Intense thirst, but they can't keep water down. That's striking.
It is very specific. Then, under fever and chilliness, it reiterates the recurrent fever and sweats, mentions those drenching night sweats yet again,
Good.
and notes that the person is generally chilly and cannot endure cold, feels the cold badly.
Right. And finally, I see it lists amenorrhea, absence of menstruation in women, often associated with anemic palpitation and dyspnea, shortness of breath.
Yes. And it includes some very serious final mentions. Epithelioma of the lip, a type of skin cancer, and cancer of the breast, specifically after ulceration has already set in.
So quite a heavy picture towards the end there, too.
And as is pretty standard for Boericke's Materia Medica, the source also gives some helpful context on, relationships to other remedies and some dosage information.
Right. Useful comparisons. It lists direct ones. Tuberculinum, which
Yeah.
makes sense given the strong tuberculosis link mentioned earlier,
Absolutely.
and antimon Iodatum.
And then specifically for hay fever, it suggests comparing Arsenicum iodatum with Aurelia, Naphthalin, Rosa, and Sangnet.
So it guides the practitioner on how to differentiate between remedies for a similar condition like hay fever.
Exactly. It helps narrow things down based on the specific symptom picture.
And what does it say about preparation and dose? Any practical tips?
It recommends the second and third trituration. Those are specific homeopathic potencies. And it gives some practical advice. It says it ought to be prepared fresh and protected from light.
Okay, so stability might be an issue.
Seems implied. And it suggests it should be continued for some time, indicating it's perhaps seen more for chronic conditions requiring longer treatment.
And there was even specific clinical advice for that tuberculosis picture mentioned, wasn't there?
Yes, quite specific. The source advises beginning with about the 4x trituration, another potency level, and then gradually going lower, down to the second X trituration.
Sure.
And it even suggests a dose, 5 grains, 3 times a day. So you see that level of practical guidance embedded right within the remedy description itself. It's quite useful contextually.
Yeah, absolutely. So stepping back now and looking at the whole picture presented in Boericke's text for Arsenicum iodatum,
Yeah.
it really emerges as a remedy that was considered for a very wide range of conditions.
It certainly does, a broad spectrum.
But the threads connecting them all seem to be those persistently irritating corrosive discharges we started with, chronic inflammation, and this profound association with debilitating states, particularly conditions mimicking tuberculosis and that general picture of weakness and emaciation.
That sums it up really well. It really does paint a detailed, interconnected picture. You can see how these Materia Medica texts tried to capture the full, complex set of symptoms where a remedy was historically thought to be indicated. The level of specificity is just remarkable.
It really is. And, that specificity kind of leads us to a final thought for you, the listener,
Yeah.
to maybe carry forward from this deep dive. Something based purely on the source material we've just explored.
Okay.
Think about those incredibly precise descriptions we encountered. Things like vomiting an hour after food, or eczema of the beard, worse by washing, or even that emaciation with good appetite.
Those fine details, yeah.
What does that sheer level, that granularity of minute detail suggest about the methods? The observation, the recording, that must have gone into compiling texts like Boericke's Materia Medica back then.
It's definitely something to ponder as you consider this kind of historical source material. What did it take to capture that level of detail?